You promised you'd choose me.
I'm a coward, Seren. Forgive me.
Of all the rejections she had endured in her life, this one nearly destroyed her. But what Seren didn't expect was that when the Alpha's brother walked away, the Alpha King himself would step forward and claim her in front of everyone. Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me. I'm working toward 1,000 subscribers, and if this story is already pulling at your heart, please hit that subscribe button for Liana's sMoonShadowTale. Smash the like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Alright, thank you. Now let's get back to the story. The sound of blades rang through the training grounds before the sun had even touched the castle walls. Seren spun low, her sword cutting through the space where her opponent's guard had dropped, and swept his legs out from under him with a calculated strike. He hit the ground hard, breath knocked from his lungs, staring up at her with a mixture of shock and grudging respect. You fight like you've got something to prove, he muttered, pushing himself up on his elbows. Seren didn't answer. She simply reset her stance. The guard scrambled to his feet, adjusting his grip, his pride clearly wounded. They circled each other once more before he lunged, predictable, aggressive, careless. Seren sidestepped, twisted, and brought the flat of her blade against his ribs. He dropped to one knee, defeated for the third time that morning. She always has something to prove. The voice sliced through the silence like poison wrapped in silk. Seren didn't need to turn to know who had spoken. She recognized that tone, the one that smiled while it cut, that pretended concern while delivering cruelty. Valeria. That's what happens, Valeria continued, descending from the stone benches with practiced grace. When you're born broken. Seren straightened slowly, sliding her sword back into its sheath. Around the training yard, other soldiers found reasons to look away, to busy themselves with their equipment. No one intervened when the wolves of the court decided to play with their favorite target. Valeria stopped a few feet away, flanked by two other noblewomen who watched with the hungry eyes of scavengers. Her blonde hair was perfectly arranged, her dress impractical for any real activity, but perfectly suited for making a statement. She tilted her head, studying Seren the way one might examine a curiosity in a museum. How many years has it been now, Seren? 22? 23? Valeria's smile was razor sharp. And your wolf still hasn't woken. Maybe it never will. Maybe you're just this human, broken, playing at being something you'll never be. Heat crawled up Seren's neck, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd learned over the years that reactions only fed the flames. Any tear was a trophy. Any tremor in her voice was their victory. My wolf, Seren said, her voice deliberately calm, doesn't define my blade, as you just witnessed. Valeria's smile faltered, just for a heartbeat before sliding back into place. A blade won't warm anyone's bed at night, dear. And it certainly won't make Prince Seren look at you as anything more than entertainment. The word hit exactly where it was meant to. Seren felt it land somewhere deep, in that place she'd spent years building walls around, but she didn't let it show. Excuse me, she said, turning toward the armory. Some of us earn our place here through effort, not through a family name. She walked away before she could see the fury flash across Valeria's face, before she could hear whatever venom would come next. The castle corridors were cool at that hour, still empty of the foot traffic that would fill them once the sun climbed higher. Seren's footsteps echoed against ancient stone as she walked, trying not to think about Valeria's words. Entertainment. Was that what she was to Seren, after all these years? She remembered the first day she'd seen him. She'd been 12 years old, newly arrived at the castle after her parents' death in service to the crown. Orphaned, alone, clinging to the only thing she knew how to do, fight. Seren had been in the training yard that day, the same age as her but worlds apart. His dark hair had caught the sunlight. His easy smile had made even the hardened soldier soften. He'd moved through the world like someone who knew he'd be adored, and he was right. Seren had been on the ground that day, knocked down by a strike she'd failed to block, her mouth full of dirt and her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. Seren had stopped, looked at her, extended his hand. You fell impressively, he'd said, that smile lighting up his whole face. Want to try again? And she had tried. Every day for the next 11 years. She got up after every fall, swallowed every humiliation, trained until her muscles screamed and her hands bled. All because somewhere between shared training sessions and stolen conversations in quiet corridors, her heart had decided it belonged to him. Seren never promised anything. That was the perfect cruelty of it. He never spoke words that could be held against him, only glances that lingered too long. Casual touches that felt far too deliberate to be accidents. Smiles meant only for her in crowded rooms. Crumbs. She'd gathered them with both hands, convincing herself that one day they'd become something whole. "You're different, Seren. Special." He said that sometimes, when they were alone in the stables or walking through the gardens after training, and she believed it. How could she not, when his eyes found hers across crowded halls? When he chose her to stand beside him during informal meals? When he whispered jokes in her ear during tedious ceremonies, making her bite her lip to hide her laughter? But Seren also disappeared. He'd vanish for days with other women, return with stories Seren pretended not to hear, then come back to her as if nothing had happened. As if she were a safe harbor he could always return to, no matter how many storms he chose to face with others. Seren stopped before one of the corridor windows, looking down at the training yard below. From this height, she could see the morning routines beginning, soldiers moving in familiar patterns. And then her eyes caught something else. A solitary figure on the highest balcony of the eastern tower. King Kalen. Even from this distance, even without being able to distinguish his features clearly, Seren felt the weight of his gaze. She knew somehow, inexplicably, that he was watching her. It wasn't the first time. Over the years, Seren had noticed Soren's older brother in unexpected moments. In the training yard when she thought no one was paying attention. In the corridors when she carried messages for the commanders. In the gardens when she helped the old healer gather herbs. Kalen was always there, watching, never approaching. He was everything Seren wasn't. Where the prince was warmth and light and easy laughter, the king was shadow and silence, and a gravity that made people straighten instinctively. 7 years older than his brother, Kalen had taken the throne far too young after their father's sudden death, and he carried the weight of the crown with a seriousness that bordered on severity. Seren looked away from the tower, her heart beating slightly faster than it should. Why is he always watching? She pushed the thought aside. She had no time for riddles, not when her own life was complicated enough. The great hall pulsed with life that night. Crimson and gold banners hung from the vaulted ceiling, musicians played in the corner, and the scent of roasted meat and spiced wine filled the air. The celebration honored the victory at the northern border, and the entire castle seemed determined to forget, for one night at least, the dangers that still lurked beyond their walls. Seren felt out of place in her simple dress among the silks and brocades of the nobility. She should have been in the back with the other soldiers and lower-ranking guards. But Seren had insisted. "Stay where I can see you," he'd said earlier, with that smile that still made her stomach flutter. It's going to be a special night. Seren had no idea what that meant, but hope, that stubborn, foolish thing that refused to die, had awakened in her chest. She found a discreet spot near one of the stone columns, where she could observe without drawing too much attention. The nobles danced in the center, a whirl of color and elegant movement. The elders spoke in clusters, their voices blending with the music. And on the elevated throne at the back of the hall, Kalen watched everything with the same unreadable expression he always wore. Seren caught herself staring at him before she realized what she was doing. The king wore black tonight. He always wore black, as if he refused any color that might soften his presence. His dark hair was tied back, revealing the strong line of his jaw and eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He didn't dance. He didn't smile. He simply existed there, a gravitational force everyone felt while pretending to ignore. As if sensing the weight of her gaze, Kalen turned his head. His eyes met Seren's across the crowded hall. She felt the air leave her lungs. There was something in that look, an intensity that didn't match the distance between them, a question she didn't know how to answer. For one insane moment, Seren had the feeling that the king could see through all her defenses, all her masks, straight into the place where she kept her deepest wounds. Then Seren appeared beside her, breaking the spell. "There you are." He held 2 glasses of wine, his grin wide, and his eyes bright with something she couldn't immediately identify. "I was looking for you." Seren accepted the glass he offered, trying to calm her racing heart. "You said it would be a special night." "What did you mean?" Soren took a long drink of wine before answering. There was a flush on his cheeks that revealed this wasn't his first glass. Maybe not even his third. "The crescent moon ritual," he said, his voice slightly louder than necessary. "It's in 2 weeks." Seren felt her stomach drop. The ritual was the ceremony where wolves claimed their mates, an ancient tradition heavy with meaning, one that determined alliances and sealed destinies. She'd watched several over the years, always from the shadows, always knowing her place in that sacred circle was impossible. How could she be claimed if she didn't even have a wolf? "I know," she said carefully, keeping her voice neutral. "What does that have to do with me?" Soren stepped closer, so close she could feel his warmth, smell the wine on his breath. "Everything," he whispered. "It has everything to do with you." And then, before she could process those words, he turned to a group of young nobles who'd gathered nearby, drawn to Soren's natural magnetism like moths to flame. "Did you hear?" Soren's voice cut through the surrounding conversations, loud enough for dozens of people to hear. "At the next crescent moon ritual, I'm going to claim Seren." The silence that followed was absolute. Seren felt the blood drain from her face. Around her, stares multiplied, surprised, curious, some openly hostile. Whispers began almost immediately, spreading through the hall like wildfire through dry grass. The prince is going to claim her? But she doesn't have a wolf. She must have bewitched him. This is a joke, right? Seren wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open and swallow her whole. But also, and she hated herself for it, she felt hope burst inside her chest like a sunrise. He chose me. After all these years, he finally chose me. Soren turned back to her, his smile triumphant, clearly satisfied with the reaction he'd provoked. "Surprise," he said softly. Seren opened her mouth to respond, to question, to say anything besides just standing there like a fool, when her eyes, acting on their own, sought the throne at the back of the hall. Kalen was no longer watching the crowd. He was looking directly at her, and the expression on his face, something like restrained concern, or perhaps warning, sent a chill racing down Seren's spine. The next 2 weeks were a nightmare disguised as a dream. News of Soren's declaration spread through the castle like sickness, infecting every conversation, every glance, every interaction. Seren couldn't cross a corridor without hearing her name whispered, without feeling judgmental eyes on her back, without catching poorly hidden smirks. Training became brutal. The other soldiers, who'd once ignored her with something resembling respect, now seemed determined to prove she wasn't worthy of standing among them, much less of becoming a prince's chosen mate. "Reset." The commander's voice boomed across the yard when Seren hit the ground for the 3rd time that morning, knocked down by an obviously illegal strike. The guard who'd taken her down, a massive man with a scar bisecting his face, didn't apologize. He just smiled, showing teeth. The future lady needs to learn to defend herself better. Or does she plan on using other talents? Laughter rippled through the watching soldiers. Seren got up, ignoring the pain in her shoulder where she'd landed. She raised her sword and attacked. This time, she didn't follow the rules either. The guard collapsed with a shout when she struck the side of his knee, and she had her blade at his throat before he could react. "My talents," she said, breathless but steady, "are right here. Would you like me to demonstrate any others?" The silence in the training yard was absolute. Seren stepped back, sheathed her sword, and walked away without looking behind her. Only when she was far enough hidden in the shadows of the stable did she allow her hands to tremble. 2 weeks. Just hold on for 2 more weeks. "You're bleeding." The voice made her jump. Seren spun, heart racing, and found Kalen standing at the stable entrance, sunlight creating a golden outline around his dark silhouette. "Your Majesty." She bowed quickly, trying to hide her still shaking hands. "I didn't know you were here." Kalen didn't move. His eyes storm gray. She realized now that he was closer than he'd ever been, dropped to her shoulder, where a red stain was beginning to spread through the fabric of her tunic. "You should see the healer." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order wrapped in the calmest voice in the world. "It's just a scratch," Seren said, hating how small her voice sounded. "It happens during training. It shouldn't happen like that." Kalen stepped into the stable, and Seren resisted the instinct to step back. "I saw what he did. The blow was intentional." Seren blinked, startled. "You saw?" Something flickered across the king's face, too fast to identify before his usual neutral expression settled back into place. I watch my soldiers, he said. All of them. But you don't watch all of them the way you watch me, Seren thought, and immediately hated herself for it. What did she know about what the king did or didn't do? Thank you for your concern, your majesty, she forced out, her voice steadier now. I'll see the healer. She moved to walk past him, but Kaelin didn't step aside. For one agonizing moment, they stood there, her trying not to breathe, him looking at her with an intensity that made her pulse race. Seren, he said her name as if testing its weight on his tongue. Are you sure you know what you're doing? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? Kaelin hesitated. The hesitation looked strange on him. A king who made life and death decisions without flinching, who commanded armies with a word, who made nobles tremble with a glance. My brother, he began, then stopped. His jaw tightened visibly. Soren is impulsive. He acts on excitement and often retreats when reality sets in. Seren felt something cold spread through her stomach. What are you trying to say? I'm saying you deserve someone who is certain. Kaelin's eyes met hers, and there was something there, something she couldn't name, something that made her heart beat in the wrong rhythm. Someone who doesn't need a crowd and wine to find courage. The silence between them stretched, heavy with meanings Seren couldn't or wouldn't decipher. Soren chose me, she finally said, the words sounding more defensive than she'd intended. For the first time in my entire life, someone chose me. I won't question that. Something shut down in Kaelin's expression. As you wish, he stepped aside, clearing the way for her to pass. Tend to that wound. Seren walked past him, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, the scent of pine and leather and something else, something that made her head spin in ways it shouldn't. She didn't look back as she walked toward the castle. If she had, she would have seen Kaelin still standing at the stable entrance, his fists clenched, his eyes following her every step as if he were battling something far greater than himself. Lady Isolde arrived at the castle 3 days before the ritual. Seren saw her first from the gardens, where she was helping old Thomas transplant lavender. The carriage that entered through the main gates was absurdly elaborate polished ebony wood with silver details that gleamed in the sunlight. The horses pulling it were white as snow, and the woman who stepped out was even more striking. Isolde had the kind of beauty that looked engineered for maximum impact. Red hair flowed in perfect waves over shoulders left bare by an emerald dress. Her eyes ice blue swept across the courtyard with the efficiency of a general surveying a battlefield. And when those eyes landed on Seren across the garden's distance, something in them gleamed. Recognition. The kind predators feel when they identify prey. Who is she? Seren asked Thomas, unable to look away. The old healer straightened with difficulty, leaning on his shovel. Lady Isolde, daughter of the Duke from the Eastern lands. He spat on the ground, a gesture of disdain Seren had never seen from him. They say she came to win the king's favor. May the gods protect us from women like her. Seren watched as Isolde was greeted by servants, as her trunks were unloaded, as she glided into the castle with the posture of someone who already considered herself its mistress. Something in Seren's chest tightened, a warning, maybe a premonition. In 3 days, I'll be claimed by Soren. In 3 days, everything changes. What could a newly arrived noble do in so little time? The answer came faster than she expected. At dinner that night, Isolde was seated beside Soren. Seren relegated to a secondary table because of court conventions, as if there were conventions for someone who wasn't officially anything watched, as the redhead laughed at every joke the prince made, touched his arm with practiced familiarity, leaned in to whisper things that made Soren smile, the same way he used to smile at her. It wasn't jealousy, Seren told herself. She had no right to feel jealous of something that wasn't hers yet. But it hurt. Gods, it hurt. She's good, a voice said beside her. Seren nearly dropped her glass. She turned and found a young woman she didn't recognize, brown hair pinned in a loose knot, eyes far too sharp for such a young face. Sorry? Lady Isolde, the young woman clarified, sitting beside Seren without asking permission. She's very good at what she does. Rumor says she's already destroyed 3 betrothals in the Eastern lands. Word is she came for the king, but it seems she found a distraction along the way. Seren returned her gaze to the high table, where Isolde now rested her hand over Soren's with an intimacy that made Seren's stomach twist. Who are you? Helena. 10th-degree cousin of someone important enough for me to be here, but not important enough for anyone to remember my name. She shrugged. I observe things. That's what invisible people do. And what have you observed? Helena tilted her head, studying Seren with disarming frankness. That you're about to lose a war you don't even know you're fighting. That Lady Isolde identified you as an obstacle the second she stepped out of that carriage. And that the prince. She paused, something like pity flickering in her eyes. The prince has never been very good at resisting things that are shiny and new. Seren swallowed hard. Soren promised me. Soren promises many things. Helena stood, smoothing her skirts. The question is what he keeps. She walked away before Seren could respond, disappearing among the guests as if she'd never been there. Seren looked back at the high table. Soren was laughing at something Isolde had said, his head thrown back, completely absorbed. And on the elevated throne, Kaelin watched. Not Isolde, not Soren. Her. Seren felt the weight of that gaze like something physical, like hands pressing on her shoulders, like a question she didn't know how to answer. What do you want from me? The king looked away first, turning his attention to a counselor approaching him. But Seren could still feel the warmth where that gaze had touched, like an invisible mark burning on her skin. The next 3 days were slow torture. Isolde seemed to be everywhere at once in the gardens when Seren walked to training, in the corridors when she returned to her quarters, at meals taking the place that should have been Seren's at Soren's side. The redhead wasn't openly hostile. She was worse than that. She was sweet, polite. She spoke to Seren with such exaggerated kindness it bordered on insult, always finding subtle ways to highlight everything that separated them. What a lovely tunic, Seren. So practical. Perfect for someone who spends so much time on the training fields. You have to teach me how you manage to train with the men, without completely ruining your hands. Mine would be destroyed. Oh, you're helping the healer again? How dedicated. It's so nice to see someone who knows her place. Every word was a fine cut, almost invisible, but it bled just the same. And Soren. Soren was disappearing. Not physically. He was still there, still appeared at dinners, still smiled at Seren when their eyes met. But there was a new distance, a hesitation where there used to be certainty. He no longer sought her out between events. He didn't wait for her after training. He didn't whisper jokes in her ear or make her feel like she was the only person in the room. On the eve of the ritual, Seren found him alone in the gardens. Soren. He turned. And for a moment, just a moment, she saw something like guilt flash in his eyes. Seren. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. What are you doing out here so late? Looking for you. She stepped closer, trying to ignore the alarm screaming in her chest. I wanted to talk about tomorrow. Soren glanced away, running a hand through his hair. Tomorrow. The ritual. She clarified unnecessarily. Do you still want to claim me? The silence that followed was the most honest answer Soren had given in weeks. Seren, he sighed, still not looking at her. Things have gotten complicated. Complicated how? The council is questioning. My brother is concerned. And Isolde? You promised. Seren's voice came out steadier than she felt. In front of everyone. You promised me. I know. Soren took a step toward her, his hands raised in a calming gesture. And I will keep my word. I just need time to sort some things out. Time? Trust me, Seren. He took her hands in his, and for a second she allowed herself to believe. I would never let you down. You know that. But she was no longer sure she did. Seren nodded anyway. Let him kiss her forehead. Let him leave her there in the garden with a heavy heart and a mind in turmoil. The night of the ritual arrived with a moon so bright it almost looked like day. The great hall had been transformed. Torches burned in stands of ancient iron, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. The sacred circle was drawn at the center of the marble floor, its ancestral runes glowing with a light of their own that Seren couldn't explain. The audience, nobles, elders, counselors formed a ring around it, all in their finest clothes, all waiting. Seren felt like an offering about to be sacrificed. Her dress was simple, deep blue with minimal adornment, the best she owned. She'd braided her dark hair and let it fall down her back. Her hands were hidden in the folds of the fabric to conceal the trembling she couldn't control. You're pale. Helena appeared at her side, materializing as she always did. Breathe. I am breathing. No, you're hyperventilating. Helena gripped her arm with surprising firmness. Look at me. Whatever happens today, you survive. Understood? You've survived worse. Seren wanted to ask how Helena knew what she'd survived, but the sound of a gong cut through any conversation. The ritual was beginning. Young wolves were called to the center one by one to make their claims. Seren watched as couples formed, some expected, others surprising, each union sealed with a touch of hands and a formal declaration. The applause was polite, the smiles calculated. The entire ceremony was political choreography disguised as tradition. And then Soren's name was called. The prince walked to the center of the circle with his usual grace. But Seren could see, because she'd known him too long, the tension in his shoulders, the way his gaze avoided hers. Prince Soren, second heir to the throne, the elder intoned. Have you come to make your claim? Seren stepped forward. It was what was expected, what everyone expected. She felt eyes turn toward her, some curious, others openly disdainful. She heard the whispers begin again. Is she really going through with this? The wolfless one. But she kept walking, because she'd come too far to turn back now. Soren saw her approaching. He lowered his head. This year, his voice came out thin, almost inaudible. This year, I claim no one. The silence that followed was deafening. Seren stopped. Her feet simply stopped, as if her body had received the message before her mind could process it. Perhaps, Soren added, still not looking at her. Perhaps at the next ritual. The words echoed through the hall, stripped of sound, bouncing off walls, off stunned faces, into Seren's soul, which felt like it was coming apart piece by piece in front of everyone. She hadn't been rejected. She hadn't been traded. She had simply been abandoned, left there, exposed, at the center of a hall full of people who had always known she wasn't worthy. You were right, she wanted to scream to every voice that had humiliated her over the years. You were always right. The whispers started. Then the snickers. Then the heavy silence of those who watched tragedy unfold in real time. Seren tried to step back, tried to find the strength to turn and walk out of that hall with what little dignity she had left. But her body wouldn't obey. She was frozen, rooted to the floor, more exposed than she'd ever been in her entire life. And it was in that moment, exactly that moment, when the entire world seemed to be collapsing, that something changed. A movement at the edge of her vision. A figure rising from the ceremonial throne. Kaelin. The king descended the steps with slow, deliberate strides, each one echoing in the absolute silence that had overtaken the hall. His face was carved stone, but his eyes burned with something Seren couldn't name. He walked through the sacred circle as if the runes didn't exist, as if the rules didn't apply to him. And perhaps they didn't, because he was the king, and kings made their own rules. He stopped beside Seren, so close she could feel his warmth, the scent of pine and storm, and something deeper, something that made every hair on her body stand on end. Kaelin looked at Soren. The prince visibly paled, stepping back on instinct. Then the king turned to the entire hall, to the gaping nobles, to the outraged elders, to Isolde frozen in place, and spoke. His voice was calm, controlled, absolutely devastating. My brother could not claim her. A pause that felt like it lasted an eternity. Because the one who will is me. The world exploded into chaos. Seren felt the floor vanish beneath her feet for the second time that night. But this time it was different. This time there was something holding her. Someone. Kaelin didn't touch her, didn't drag her, didn't force her, didn't treat her like an object to be taken. He simply extended his hand, palm up, fingers open, and waited. Offering, respecting, letting her choose. Seren stared at that hand as if it belonged to some otherworldly creature. She looked at the king's face, searching for explanation, for motive, for something that made sense. She found nothing but certainty. She didn't know why she did what she did next. Maybe it was desperation, maybe instinct, maybe something deeper, something that had been waiting for this moment for years without her knowing. Her hand found his, and when her skin touched Kaelin's, something inside Seren, something that had been silent her entire life, stirred. A spark of warmth shot through her chest, climbed her throat, made her heart skip a beat. It faded quickly, leaving only weak knees and a trail of sensation she couldn't explain. Seren's eyes widened, her breath caught. Kaelin watched her with an intensity that seemed intent on unraveling her completely. And somewhere in the shadows of the hall, Isolde watched her carefully spun web of schemes crumble before her eyes. The wolfless girl had just been claimed by the king. The silence that followed Kaelin's declaration lasted only 3 heartbeats. After that, chaos. Voices erupted from every corner, whispers turning into exclamations, exclamations into outright protests. The elders rose from their seats, ceremonial robes billowing. Nobles exchanged glances heavy with political calculation, already redrawing alliances in their minds. And at the center of it all, Seren remained motionless, her hand still held by Kaelin's, unable to process what had just happened. "This is an affront to tradition." Elder Theron's voice cut through the commotion, his wrinkled face twisted in fury. "The king cannot simply—" "The king can." Kaelin's reply was calm but carried the weight of 1,000 years of authority. And the king just did. He hadn't released Seren's hand. She noticed that with strange clarity, as if her mind were clinging to small details so it wouldn't have to face the enormity of what was happening. His hand was warm, steady, surprisingly callous, the hands of a warrior, not just a ruler. "Your Majesty." Counselor Vance approached, his voice controlled but his eyes shining with genuine alarm. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately. There are implications." "The implications will be addressed tomorrow." Kaelin finally released Seren's hand, but only so he could position himself beside her in a way that made it clear anyone wishing to reach her would have to go through him first. "Tonight, the ritual continues. The other claims will be made. The couples formed have my blessing. This ceremony is finished." He turned to Seren, and for a second his expression softened so briefly she almost thought she'd imagined it. "Come," he said quietly, only for her to hear. "You don't need to remain here." Seren wanted to protest, wanted to ask what was happening, why he'd done that. But the words refused to come, trapped somewhere between her throat and the knot of emotions twisting inside her chest. So she simply nodded and let the king guide her out of the hall, past shocked faces and hostile stares. The castle corridors felt different at night, longer, darker, filled with shadows that moved at the edges of Seren's vision as she followed Kaelin through passages she'd never walked before. He moved in silence, his posture rigid, never looking back to check if she followed. Seren wondered if he regretted it, if now that the adrenaline had faded, he was calculating the political cost of what he'd done, if she was just a piece in some game she couldn't see. "Why did you do this?" The question burned on her tongue, but she didn't dare speak it. Not yet. They climbed a spiral staircase that seemed endless, past guards who bowed in silent reverence, through an antechamber lined with ancient tapestries depicting battles and conquests. Then Kaelin stopped before a set of double doors made of dark oak, adorned with the royal crest. "These are the chambers reserved for the king's mate," he said, his voice neutral. "You'll stay here." "I don't." She swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "I don't understand what's happening." Kaelin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pushed the doors open, revealing a suite that stole Seren's breath. The space was vast, a sitting area with velvet armchairs and a crackling fireplace, a study lined with shelves of books, and through a half-open door, she could glimpse an enormous bed covered in white linens. Tall windows overlooked the castle gardens, and moonlight streamed through them in beams that made everything look unreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. "Come in," Kaelin said. It wasn't an order. There was something almost hesitant in his voice that didn't match the image of the unshakable king. "You're safe here." Seren crossed the threshold cautiously, feeling like an intruder in a place where she didn't belong. Her eyes scanned every detail, the antique furniture, the silk curtains, the soft rugs beneath her feet, searching for something that made sense, something that explained why she was here. Kaelin entered behind her, closing the doors. The sound of the bolt sliding into place made Seren's heart race. "You have no reason to fear," he said, apparently noticing her tension. "Nothing will be imposed on you." She turned to face him. In the glow of the fireplace, Kaelin looked different, less the distant king and more human. The shadows softened the hardness of his features, and there was something in his eyes, a weariness, perhaps, or a vulnerability he usually kept hidden, that made Seren want to step closer instead of away. "Why?" The question finally escaped, carrying all the confusion and pain of the night. Kaelin walked to the fireplace, bracing one hand on the stone mantel as he looked into the flames. Because you didn't deserve to endure another humiliation. That's not an answer. It's the truth. He turned to face her, and there was an intensity in his gaze that made the air feel heavier. I watched you grow on the training fields. Watched every fall, every humiliation, every time you stood again when anyone else would have given up. I saw the strength you carry, Seren. A strength you yourself fail to recognize. He paused, and something shifted in his expression, something older, deeper. But before that, I watched your parents. I saw your father and mother fight beside mine at the borders. Saw their loyalty, their courage. When they died in service, it was my father who promised you would never be left unprotected. He brought you to this castle, and when he was gone, that promise became mine. Seren felt something tighten in her chest. For an instant, everything made sense in a way that was almost cruel. So that's why. He feels responsible. You were watching me. It wasn't a question. It was an understanding that had been forming for years in all those moments when she'd felt the weight of an unseen gaze on her shoulders. Yes. Kaelin didn't look away, didn't try to soften or explain. I watched you. Why? This time, Kaelin hesitated. His expression shifted not into coldness, but into something harder to hide. In the beginning, he said at last, I watched because it was my duty. Because I owed your parents and my own father. He drew in a slow breath, as if preparing to cross an invisible line. But over time, it was no longer about responsibility. Seren's heart quickened. There was something about you I couldn't ignore, Kaelin continued, his voice lower now. Something that made me pay attention even when 1,000 other things demanded it. I tried to convince myself it was just admiration, respect for your determination. But tonight, when I saw you standing there, exposed like that, he stopped, his jaw tightening. I suspected Cedric would not have the courage to claim you. I suspected you would be humiliated again, and I could not allow that. Seren held her breath. My instinct wouldn't allow me to leave you alone in that shame, he finished, every word slow and heavy. And for the first time in a very long while, I didn't want to fight it. Seren didn't know what to say. A mix of relief, shock, and something she didn't yet dare to name washed through her entire body. And now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens now? Kaelin studied her for a long moment. Now you rest. Tomorrow there will be time for explanations, for facing the council, for dealing with the consequences of what I've done. He walked toward the door leading to another section of the chambers, his own rooms, Seren realized with a jolt. You'll sleep here. Seren felt her cheeks warm. You don't expect me to? No. His answer came quickly, almost abruptly. I expect nothing from you, Seren. If there is ever a future between us, it will be by your choice, not by duty or tradition. He opened the door and paused in the threshold. Good night, Seren. Then he disappeared down the quiet corridor, leaving the room far too big, far too empty, and Seren small before all that was changing too fast. She stood in the middle of the chamber, her heart pounding as if trying to escape. She went to the window, seeking air, light, answers. The moon bathed the gardens in cold light, but inside her there was only warmth, a warmth that made no sense. Hours earlier, maybe minutes, maybe a lifetime, she'd been tense, anxious, waiting for Soren to finally claim her, the prince she thought she loved, the future she thought she wanted. But now she stood there with trembling hands, and she couldn't stop replaying the moment Kaelin extended his hand to her. His touch, his gaze, his courage, his certainty. Since that touch during the ritual, something inside her had shifted. It wasn't just a spark. It was as if a muscle she'd never known existed had awakened. As if some ancient echo had answered his call before she'd even thought. What is happening to me? The question rose not as panic, but as dizziness. Her world was turning upside down. Hours ago, she'd feared losing Soren. Now she feared remembering the king too well. Seren rested her forehead against the window, struggling to steady her breath. The future was a fog before her, uncertain, unpredictable, completely off the path she'd imagined for years. And strangely, it wasn't fear she felt. It was something far more dangerous. Hope. The sun had barely risen when knocks at the door yanked Seren out of restless sleep. She shot to her feet, disoriented for a moment, to find herself in silk sheets instead of the thin mattress of her old quarters. "My lady," a female voice came from the other side of the door. "The king requests your presence at breakfast." Seren looked down at the wrinkled dress she still wore and almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. "One moment," she managed to say. When she opened the door, she found a round-faced woman with curious eyes, balancing a tray with water, towels, and what looked like a new dress. "I'm Marta," the woman said, stepping inside without waiting for invitation. "I've been assigned to serve you from today on." She set the tray on a table and held up the dress deep green fabric, simple in cut but clearly luxurious. "This was sent from the royal wing. The king thought you might like to change before going down." Seren took the dress, feeling the softness of the fabric between her fingers. The king thought. It was strange. Soren had never thought about such things. He'd never cared whether she had anything to wear, whether she was comfortable, whether she needed anything. He simply assumed she'd be there whenever he wanted. "The council is already assembled," Marta went on, helping Seren remove the dress from the night before. "They say the discussion started before dawn. The elders are furious." "Can you tell me what they're saying?" Marta hesitated, her fingers pausing on the ties of the new dress. "I don't know if I should." "Please." Seren turned to face her. "I'd rather know what awaits me." The maid bit her lip, clearly torn between caution and budding sympathy. "They say the king has gone mad," she said at last, lowering her voice as if the walls could hear. "That choosing a woman without a wolf is an insult to the royal lineage. Some counselors are demanding the claim be annulled. Others say that's impossible once it's been made before the sacred circle." Seren felt her stomach drop. "And Prince Soren?" Something flickered across Marta's face, pity, perhaps, or discomfort. "The prince withdrew to his chambers after the ritual. They say he hasn't left since." "Serves him right," part of Seren wanted to say. But another part, the part that had loved Soren for years, that still carried the marks of that love like invisible scars, felt a stab of something that refused to become anger. The hall where royal breakfast was served lay in the eastern wing of the castle. When Seren entered, with Marta at her side, she immediately felt the weight of every gaze turned toward her. The table was long, occupied by faces she recognized from the night before, counselors, elders, a few high-ranking nobles. And at the head of the table, Kaelin. The king rose when she walked in. The gesture was small, almost subtle, but Seren saw the surprise flash across the faces around the table. Kings didn't stand for anyone. "Seren." He indicated the chair at his right, the place of honor, traditionally reserved for the consort. "Sit." She walked to the chair on legs that didn't seem to belong to her, acutely aware of every gaze tracking her, every whisper dying on lips as she passed. When she sat, she could see the faces more clearly. Counselor Vance with his calculating expression, Elder Theron, still red with indignation, and Isolde. The redhead sat on the opposite side of the table, flawless in an ivory dress that made her look like a bride. Her eyes met Serene's, and the smile that curved her lips was as sweet as poison. "Seren, dear." Isolde's voice sliced through the tense silence. "What a charming dress. Green looks so good on you. It suits your origins." Seren opened her mouth to respond, but Kaelin was faster. "Lady Isolde," the king's voice was ice. "As I understand it, you came to this castle as a guest. Guests uphold certain courtesies, especially toward those who hold places of honor at the royal table." Isolde's smile faltered. "Your Majesty, I was only nothing." Kaelin didn't raise his voice, but something in his tone made even the oldest counselors straighten in their seats. "Seren is mine. I chose her. Any disrespect toward her is a direct insult to the king. I trust that is clear." The silence that followed was so thick, Seren could have cut it with a knife. Isolde lowered her eyes to her plate, her cheeks flushed red. Seren felt a flicker of satisfaction she immediately tried to suppress. This wasn't the time for small revenges. "Your Majesty." Counselor Vance cleared his throat, seizing the pause to reclaim control of the conversation. "We must address the implications of last night. The council has concerns." "Concerns." Kaelin repeated the word as if dissecting it. "And what would those be?" "Miss Seren has never manifested her wolf." Vance spoke with the care of someone walking on broken glass. "Tradition is clear, the royal consort must be able to bear strong heirs. Without a wolf, Tradition is also clear about claims made within the sacred circle, Kaelin cut in. Once declared, they are irrevocable. Or is the council suggesting I break ancestral oaths? Vance paled. No, your majesty, we merely... Then the matter is settled. Kaelin took a sip from his goblet with a calm that contrasted sharply with the tension in the room. Seren will have every protection and privilege this position grants. Anyone who questions that is questioning my authority as king. Seren watched the exchange, barely able to believe what she was witnessing. Kaelin, the distant king, the quiet ruler she'd spent years admiring from afar, was defending her before the entire council, publicly, without hesitation. It was more than Seren had ever done. The comparison rose in her mind before she could stop it, dragging with it a wave of conflicting emotions. Where Seren made promises in whispers and backed down under pressure, Kaelin spoke openly and faced any opposition head-on. You deserve someone who is certain. His words in the stable days ago echoed in her mind with new meaning. Excuse me. A familiar voice cut through her thoughts. Everyone turned to the entrance of the hall, where Seren stood. Seren felt the air leave her lungs. The prince looked wrecked. His dark hair was disheveled, shadows hollowed his handsome face, and there was a pallor to his skin that spoke of a sleepless night. But it was his gaze when it found hers that struck her like a physical blow. There was pain there, regret, and something else, something that looked dangerously like desperation. Seren. Kaelin's voice was controlled, but Seren could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a fire. We didn't expect to see you this morning. I need to speak with you. Seren didn't look away from Seren as he spoke. In private. Whatever you have to say can be said here. It cannot. The prince finally turned to his brother, and there was a challenge in his stance Seren had never seen before. Unless you want the entire court to hear what I think about what happened last night. The silence was absolute. Kaelin rose slowly, the movement loaded with controlled tension that made the muscles in his shoulders look carved from stone. Very well. He turned to Seren, and for a second his expression softened. Finish your breakfast. Marta will stay with you. Then he walked toward Seren, passing his brother without so much as a glance, expecting the prince to follow him out of the hall. Seren watched the two of them disappear through the doors, her heart beating in an uneven rhythm. Well, Isolde broke the silence, the poisonous smile back on her lips. This promises to be interesting. Seren didn't answer. She only tightened her grip around her goblet until her fingers hurt, and tried not to think about what was happening beyond those walls. The inner gardens were the only place in the castle where Kaelin allowed himself to feel anything beyond the weight of the crown. The rose bushes his mother had planted decades earlier still bloomed there, a reminder of simpler times, back when he'd been just a boy who dreamed of becoming a knight instead of a king. But today, even the roses seemed unable to soothe the storm inside his chest. You've gone insane. Soren's voice cut through the silence the moment the garden doors closed behind them. It's the only explanation. Kaelin didn't turn around. He kept his gaze fixed on the flowers, his hands clasped behind his back. Insane for doing what you didn't have the courage to do. I was going to claim her. Was going to. Kaelin finally turned, and there was something dangerous in his eyes that made Seren step back. Because from what I saw last night, you left her exposed in front of the entire court. You humiliated her in a way no decent man would and no prince should. I didn't. Things got complicated. Seren ran a hand through his hair in a frustrated gesture. Kaelin knew far too well. Isolde showed up. The council started pressuring me, and I needed time to... To what? Decide whether Seren was convenient enough for you? That's not what happened. That is exactly what happened. Kaelin took a step toward his brother, and though he didn't raise his voice, his presence seemed to fill the entire space. You spent years keeping Seren close, offering scraps of affection to keep her waiting, without ever having the decency to be honest about what you actually wanted. And when the moment finally came to stand by your words, you backed down, as you always do. Soren's face drained of color. You don't know what you're talking about. I know better than you think. Something old stirred in Kaelin's chest, a frustration built over years of watching his brother toy with Seren's feelings as if they were disposable trinkets. I saw it, Seren. I saw every time you went to her when you were bored and ignored her the moment something more exciting appeared. I saw how she waited for you, how she believed your empty promises. And I saw the look on her face last night when you abandoned her. He paused, his voice dropping to something colder. Do you really think that's what our father would have wanted? I didn't abandon her. I just needed more time. Time for what? To decide whether Isolde's blue eyes were worth more than years of loyalty? Kalen shook his head, something between disappointment and sadness flickering in his eyes. Seren deserves someone who is certain of her. You never were. Soren stayed silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke again, his voice was lower, weighted with emotion Kalen couldn't immediately identify. And you are? Certain of her? The question hit Kalen somewhere he wasn't expecting. What are you trying to say? I'm saying that you appeared out of nowhere and claimed her in front of everyone. Soren stepped closer, accusation sharpening his features. You, who never showed interest in anyone. You, who rejected every potential match the council presented. Suddenly, Seren is important enough for you to cause a political scandal. Kalen felt his jaw tighten. That is none of your concern. None of my concern? Soren let out a bitter laugh devoid of humor. You took the woman I intended to claim, and you say it's none of my concern? You lost her the moment you left her standing alone in that circle. Kalen's voice was sharp as a blade. I didn't take her from you, Soren. You threw her away. The silence that followed was heavier than anger. There was pain there too, the pain of two brothers who had somehow become rivals over something neither fully understood. Do you love her? Soren's question came out almost as a whisper. Kalen didn't answer right away. The truth was, he didn't know. What he felt for Seren was confusing a mix of protectiveness, admiration, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. A heavy silence stretched before Kalen finally spoke. I respect her. I admire her strength, and our father protected her because he owed that to her parents. His voice was low but firm as steel. We inherited that promise, Soren, but you failed, and I had to repair the damage. Soren studied his brother for a long moment, something indefinable crossing his gaze. You've always been like this. Soren's voice emerged low, trembling with fury, as if every word scraped against something raw. The perfect son, the exemplary prince, the unshakable king. He stepped forward, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. And now you use our father's name just to avoid admitting the truth that you want her. That you didn't even think for 1 second before claiming the woman I love. Soren, Kalen tried, his voice still controlled. But Soren was no longer hearing anything. He lunged forward, fast, his hand clenched into a fist, aiming for his brother's jaw. The movement was brutal. But Kalen caught the blow mid-air, his hand closing around Soren's fist like an iron shackle. No hesitation, no visible effort, just raw strength and absolute authority. They stood face to face, the air between them crackling with something feral. Let go! Soren spat, trying to yank his arm back. Stop. Kalen's voice finally lost its calm. Don't do this. Soren tried to pull free again, but with a firm pivot, Kalen twisted his body, pinning his brother from behind, his forearm locked across Soren's chest. Soren snarled, thrashing like a trapped animal. Let go! You will stop only when you think clearly again. Kalen's voice was deep now, heavy and tense. Stop before you do something you cannot undo. Soren tried to break free once more. Kalen tightened just enough to remind him which of them was stronger. Do you know what's really happening to you? Kalen murmured near his brother's ear, his voice cutting. Pride. Nothing but pride. Soren froze for a heartbeat. You never saw Seren for who she truly is, Kalen went on. You never wanted the woman who stood by you for years. You wanted what she represented for your ego. Soren was breathing hard, trembling with rage. Kalen released him deliberately, stepping back and letting the prince regain his footing. And that was when he struck. Tell me, Soren. Kalen lifted his chin, his gaze steady, almost merciless. If I undo what I did, if I annul the claim right now, would you claim her? Soren opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Kalen took another step toward him. And if you did, would it be because you want her? A deadly pause. Or because your pride is wounded? The words cut through Soren like a blade. Without another word, Soren turned on his heel and left, abandoning the king alone among his mother's roses. Kalen remained there for a long time, staring at the flowers without really seeing them. You want her too? Soren's words echoed in his mind, dragging up sensations he'd been trying to suppress for far longer than he cared to admit. He thought of Seren, of the way she lifted her chin whenever she refused to show weakness, of the spark in her eyes when she managed to knock down an opponent during training. And he thought of how, since the previous night, every time she walked into a room, something in his chest seemed to tighten in a way he couldn't explain. It was unsettling. It was frightening. And in a way he couldn't begin to understand, it was also liberating. Kalen shook his head, forcing control back into his body. There was a kingdom to govern, a council to pacify, and a confused young woman who depended on him for protection. This wasn't the time for existential doubts. With one last glance at the roses, he walked back toward the castle. Seren spent the rest of the morning exploring her new chambers, trying to get used to the idea that this space was now hers. A sound at the door made her turn. Marta came in carrying a tray with lunch, her round face set in an expression that hovered between worry and barely disguised curiosity. The king sent this. She set the tray on a table near the window. He said you should eat something, and that he'll come to see you tonight, if you allow it. If you allow it. Seren felt something warm spread through her chest at those words. Even now, even after everything, Kalen still asked for permission. Tell him that yes, he can come. The afternoon passed in a haze of thoughts and uncertainty. Seren tried to read, but the words wouldn't stick. She tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. She tried not to think about Soren, about Kalen, about what the future might hold, but it was impossible to think of anything else. When night fell, she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting for the 10th time a dress Marta had brought her. Her hair was loose, falling in dark waves over her shoulders, and she wondered whether she was getting too dressed up or not enough, or if none of it truly mattered. The knock at the door made her jump. Come in. Kalen stepped inside, and Seren felt the air leave her lungs. The king had traded his formal clothes for something simpler, a dark tunic, riding pants, boots that showed signs of wear. His hair was looser than she'd ever seen it, and without the armor of courtly formality, he looked younger, more approachable, more dangerous. Seren. He stopped a few steps away from her, as if afraid to get too close. I hope I'm not intruding. You're not. She hated how small her voice sounded. I was just waiting. The corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but the closest thing to one she'd ever seen on him. Waiting for me. You said you would come. I did. He walked to the window, looking out at the moon beginning to rise over the gardens. We need to talk about a few things. About what happens from now on. Seren moved closer, stopping at his side without touching him. Did the council accept it? The council had no choice. There was a faint note of satisfaction in his voice that didn't match his usually controlled demeanor. The claim was made in the sacred circle. To break it would be sacrilege none of them would dare commit. But they're not happy. No. Kalen turned to face her, and Seren realized he was closer than she'd thought. Many believe I made a mistake. And you? Seren asked. What do you believe? The question hung between them, heavy with meanings neither of them could quite put into words. I believe I did what was right, Kalen said at last, his voice lower now. I believe you deserve more than what you've been given. Seren nodded, but something in her chest was still heavy, a question she couldn't swallow. How was it? The words slipped out before she could stop them. The conversation with Soren. Kalen visibly tensed. The change was subtle, a tightening of his shoulders, a clench in his jaw. But Seren noticed. She always noticed the details others ignored. It was what it needed to be, he answered, his voice losing some of the warmth it had held moments before. Is he all right? The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Kalen stepped away from the window, taking a few strides toward the fireplace. With his back to her, his posture looked like a wall. You're worried about him. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. And there was something in the way he said it, something that sounded like disappointment that made Seren's stomach sink. That's not it, she rushed to say, taking a step toward him. You're brothers. I don't want to be the reason for a war between you. I don't want you to fight because of me. Kalen turned slowly. His eyes found hers, and she saw something there she hadn't expected. Vulnerability. It's not because of you, he said quietly. It's because of his choices, his failures. But Seren, he said her name in a way that stopped her cold. Soren made his choices. I made mine. Whatever stands between me and my brother is not something you need to carry. She wanted to argue, wanted to explain that it wasn't about Seren. Not really. It was about not wanting to tear a family apart. It was about the guilt she carried for being there, in that room, taking up a place she'd never imagined would be hers. But the words wouldn't come. And Kaylin kept looking at her like that, as if he were waiting for something, as if every second of silence confirmed a suspicion he didn't want to have. The disappointment in his eyes was almost tangible. "I should go," he said, already turning toward the door. "You need to rest." Seren felt panic claw its way up her throat. He was pulling away. He was reading everything wrong. He was thinking she still cared for Seren in a way she no longer did. Not after everything. Not after last night. Not after feeling Kaylin's hand in hers and realizing it was different from anything she'd ever known. She moved on instinct. Or maybe it wasn't instinct at all. Maybe it was something that had been growing inside her since the moment he stepped down from that throne and walked to her in the middle of the hall. Maybe it was the only way she knew to show what words couldn't carry. Seren crossed the distance between them in 3 steps. Her hands found his face, the strong line of his jaw, the warmth of his skin beneath her palms. "Wait," she whispered. Kaylin froze, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. And then, before she could think, before she could doubt, before fear could stop her, Seren kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, urgent, a plea and a declaration all at once. For a heartbeat, Kaylin remained perfectly still, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. And then something broke. His hands came up to grip her waist, pulling her closer, and he kissed her back with an intensity that made her knees weak. It was nothing like the stolen kisses she'd imagined with Seren, soft, careful, hesitant. This was fire. This was certainty. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kaylin rested his forehead against hers. "Seren," he breathed, his voice rough. "What?" "I don't love him," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I thought I did. For years I thought I did. But I was in love with the idea of being chosen, of finally mattering to someone. I see that now." She pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "When you took my hand last night, something inside me woke up. Something that had been asleep my entire life. And I don't know what it means, but I know." Her voice caught. "I know that I've never felt with him what I feel when you look at me." Kaylin's hands tightened on her waist, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her feel exposed in ways that had nothing to do with vulnerability. "And what do you feel?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Seen," Seren said simply. "For the first time in my life, I feel seen." Something shifted in Kaylin's expression, the walls he'd been holding up crumbling piece by piece. "I've been watching you for years," he confessed, fighting the way I felt, telling myself it was duty, honor, a promise to your parents. But the truth is, Seren, he cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing across her cheek with a gentleness that contrasted with the fierce emotion in his eyes. "The truth is, I claimed you last night not because of duty. I claimed you because the thought of anyone else having you, especially my brother, was unbearable. I claimed you because you're mine. You've been mine since the first time I saw you stand up after a fall that would have broken anyone else." Seren's breath caught. "You're certain," she whispered, remembering his words from days ago. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, like a vow being sealed. And as his lips moved against hers, as his hands held her like something precious, Seren felt it. A surge of warmth, a pulse of energy, something ancient and wild stirring inside her chest, unfurling like wings that had been bound too long. She gasped, breaking the kiss, her hand flying to her chest. What is that?" Kaylin's eyes widened, and then something like wonder crossed his face. "Your wolf," he breathed. "Seren, your wolf is waking." The warmth intensified, spreading through her limbs, making her skin tingle. She could feel it now, a presence inside her that had always been there, waiting, dormant, not broken, just waiting for the right moment, waiting to be recognized, to be seen, to be claimed by the right person. "How?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Kaylin pulled her close, holding her as tremors ran through her body. "The bond," he said softly. "When a true mate claims you, When the connection is real, it can awaken what's been sleeping. Seren looked up at him through tear-blurred vision. True mate? Kalen smiled, a real smile this time, one that transformed his entire face. Why do you think I've been watching you all these years? Why do you think I couldn't stay away, even when I tried? He pressed a kiss to her forehead. My wolf recognized you long before I was. If this story has taken you on a ride, then I need you to do something for me. Please, hit that subscribe button for Liana's SMoonShadowTale. I'm working toward 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything. Like, comment, share this story with someone who loves a good romance with teeth. Because what comes next is going to change everything. Thank you for being here. Thank you for feeling this with me.